Hello everyone, it's Elizabeth from the Smart Stitcher. This week we are talking fourchettes. You will have 12 of these cut out for when we did our pattern making, and you'll have 6 that are facing with the curve facing to the left, and you'll have 6 with the curve facing to the right. As they are on the table at the moment, the right side of the leather is looking up at us, and the back side of the leather, the sort of slightly furry side, is touching the mat. So your fourchettes are the pieces that go down in between the fingers to help us add depth to the glove. So this video is about how to sew those together, and then our next video will be in showing you how to insert them into the glove. So let's get into it. It doesn't matter which hand you start with, but we basically need to put them into pairs. So for each hand you will need 3 with the curve facing to the right and 3 with the curve facing to the left. And then what we are going to do is just put them into pairs so that each pair has, basically they mirror each other, they're mirror opposites, but you have one with the curve facing left and one with the curve facing right. So this is your fourchette shape that we created. The straight edge is what runs along the back of the finger, and the curved edge fits around the sort of the tip of the finger and looks a little bit like this when it's in situ. So we've got the top edge running along the back of the finger, and the curved edge mirrors and sort of follows the shape of the sort of that fleshy underside of your finger. So I've got my first pair of fourchettes on the table, and the right side of the leather, the smooth side, is facing me, the fluffy side is touching the mat. I'm going to place one fourchette on top of the other with the right sides touching, and I want to line them up. Now the good news is what we do to this pair we do and we repeat for all the other pairs of fourchettes. So I'm just lining them up to make sure they're nice and straight, and I'm going to clip them just on the seam allowance just to help stabilize them whilst we get ready for sewing. If you wish, you can of course tack them as well, but my personal preference for this, because it's such a shorter area, is to clip on my seam allowance elsewhere. I'll also just use a little bit of low tack tape to remove any sort of bits of fluff that I've picked up along the way, but I want to make sure that they are nice and level. I've got 60 centimetres of my thread that I'm sewing my gloves with in my needle. I've waxed it and I've got it in a betweens number 7. So the first thing I'm going to do with my doubled over thread is I'm going to start sewing along this bottom edge here where the curve is, and we're going from here up to this edge here. I tend to find that's helpful because of how I then insert the fourchette into the glove in the next stage. So we're going to start our thread in much the same way as we have done previously, and I'm just going to go through that sort of little bits, a single layer of the leather on my stitching line. So I've gone under and I've got sort of, oh, I'm a bit too far in, so I'm just going to come over a little bit more. There we go, that's better. So I'm just going to check that I haven't come through to the front, which we don't want to see with our starting stitch, and I haven't. So I'm going to go through and pull my needle through. There we go. Now I'm going to leave a slightly longer tail just so I can catch it with my thumb, and then we're going to repeat that stitch going back through again. So let's do that. So again, I don't want to sort of go through to the front of my leather, following the path of where I went previously. If I turn it over, I can just see that I haven't gone through. Needle's nice and secure, so I can pull that through. And before my loop closes up, what I will do is take my needle back through, and I will pull that nice and tight. And I'm going to pull both ends of my thread just to make sure that the tail is tight as well as the thread that I'm sewing with, and it just helps to pull everything in. So there we go, we've got our starting stitch, I've got my tail, And the next thing for me to do is just to cut off that tail, and then we're going to hammer the knot flat. So I'm going to cut the tail off nice and close because I don't want my threads poking through at any particular stage. And I'm going to, just taking care not to hit my clip, I just wish to hammer that knot a little bit with my leather hammer, and I can feel it and it feels much flatter. So that's what we're going to do with that one. And now we're going to stitch. So this is a bit like the stitch that we're going to be using. You can of course use the pre-stitch if you wish, that we had on the sort of sample video when we were talking about pre-stitch, or you can do another type of stitch that I'm going to show you now that's a little similar to over sewing. So I'm going to come and sort of start my thread off at the base of that sort of curved edge that goes up along the finger, and I've poked my needle through on my sort of seam allowance, so I'm 3 to 4 millimeters away from the edge, and I'm going to come through. Now the first stitch, because I'm sort of coming back on myself slightly, may well feel a little bit sort of strange to start with, but I'll just enlarge it just to show you a little bit more. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go through this stitch in effect twice. So I'm going to come back through that one there, go once and a second time. Okay, so I've kind of allowed for the fact that I started slightly further in. I've now, so I started here, I came back down here, and now I'm going to work my way up. And again, stitch consistency is really important. So I'm looking for 3 to 4 millimeters gap, 3 to 4 millimeters. Well, actually we're going over, but you want to be sort of, I suppose, 3 to 4 millimeters from the edge as well. And then we're going to just go through. We can keep an eye on the back and see where we've gone through there on the back, and we're going to pull the thread through. Now this time we don't have to go through any loops. Make sure that both threads lie flat against the leather, and then we are going to go through the hole again. And this is where it helps, you can just turn it over to see where you go in. So in effect, as we go up to secure it, we're going to do each stitch twice, and then we're ready to move on. So again, similar kind of gap between your stitches, go through, there we go, go once, go twice, and then you're going to work your way along to complete the stitches right up until this end, and that's what I'm going to do now. So we've finished the stitches. I've gone right the way up as far as I can to the point up here, and I have finished with that sort of final double stitch, keeping the same pattern that I have been using all the way along. Now I'm going to leave my thread attached because that is going to then help me insert the fourchette into the glove at the sort of the next stage of our construction. This stitch, it's a little like over sewing. It can also be known as streetly stitch in gloving as well. You can use it on the outside instead of pre-stitch. I tend to quite like using it on the inside so that the fourchette is nice and secure at the base. And if you can imagine, this will sit in between the fingers, and as this opens up, you can see that it sort of helps to add the depth inside the glove. So I tend to find at the next stage that it's helpful to have this thread because I can then secure it into the top part of the glove, and then if I need to trim the fourchettes, which I will need to do, I will trim them from this underside edge a little bit more. Now one final thing to do before I can put that to one side is I can just use my hammer and just very gently flatten out the stitches, and that just helps to make them a little bit more comfortable for the wearer. I'm going to just go down both sides, and you can feel that it does make a nice difference there. If you need to cut your needle off at all, that's absolutely fine. I would recommend cutting it up at this sort of end by the eye of the needle. Don't cut it down here. If you find that you need to finish your thread off or your thread snaps, you can just do a repeat of the starting stitch where you go through the bite of the leather and then make a buttonhole or a sort of almost like a blanket stitched loop and pull it tight, and start your new thread off in the same way, and remember to hammer it. Right, so that is the first pair complete. We've got another 2 pairs for one hand and then the 3 pairs of the other hand to do, and I will see you ready for the next stage to put them into the glove.